Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
Matthew, you were on the podcast about 3 years ago, and at that time you had 4 rentals, and I always think it's interesting to check in with people and see what they've been up to. So what does your portfolio look like today?
Well, Dan, now we have 8 doors, and one of those is a short-term rental, and the rest are single-family houses.
And when you were on the podcast, you mentioned that your long-term goal was to get to $10,000 a month in cash flow. How are things going with that?
Yeah, we're there, Dan. We're just over $10,000 in monthly cash flow.
Matthew buys really nice properties in really good neighborhoods. Those types of properties were pretty expensive 3 years ago, but they're even more expensive today. So I want to see how Matthew is making this work. On the last episode, Matthew mentioned that his goal was to get his entire portfolio paid off. At the time, he had a lot of 3% mortgages, and I don't know if it ever makes sense to pay off a 3% mortgage. So we're going to see if his thinking has changed on that or if he's still working on getting everything paid off. And of course, we're going to take a look at his numbers. I want to see what his total rents are, what his expenses are, and how he's getting to $10,000 a month. Joining us on the show today from Orlando is Matthew Crawford. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to Matthew. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
Matthew, so we talked to you last on episode number 280, and it sounds like you've done a lot with buying rentals and building your portfolio. So tell us more about your properties. What have you been buying?
Dan, mostly we buy single-family houses, and we were primarily looking in the Middle Tennessee area. And, everybody's got their own preferences, but for us, we liked older houses built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that had brick exterior, hardwood floors, generally 3-bedroom, 1-bath, or 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses.
And you mentioned that you also bought a short-term rental. Is that property similar to the other properties you've been buying?
Just by chance, it is. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. We bought it. It's in Crystal River, Florida. We bought it because we love the area, and we like to visit. Matter of fact, I'm sitting in Crystal River right this minute.
You mentioned that your long-term goal was to get 7 to 10 paid off properties. And I know 3 years is a long time and plans have changed. Is that still your goal or is that still something you're working towards?
Well, I'll never get money that cheap again. I hate to pay those off when I could invest in something at a higher rate and keep, buy money or not pay off the cheap money at this point.
Right. So what are the rates on the rentals?
Some of those are in the 3s.
Wow.
I think the highest one was like 4.5.
Yeah, I don't know if that ever makes sense to pay off a mortgage that cheap. It's we're probably never going to see rates that low again, and you can make more than 3 or 4% just putting money in the bank right now. It just, to me, it makes zero sense to pay off a mortgage that cheap. So is that a reason why you haven't really aggressively been paying things down?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And with the addition, we want to buy a few more houses. I'm thinking 4 more. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not going to put any money on mortgages when I'm looking for the next property.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. Now, when we talked, you were buying rentals in Nashville, and I think you were living in Nashville but when we talked, but now you're in Orlando. Are you buying properties in Florida or are you still buying in Nashville?
Well, I would love to buy in Nashville and some of the suburbs of Nashville, but the prices just seem to keep going up, and the rents are not keeping up with it. So I look at every deal in my area that, or every, I follow the MLS pretty closely for that area, and I haven't seen anything that even comes close to penciling. I mean, you'd have to make just the most ridiculous offers ever to
Yeah.
even be considered. So, no, we're looking more in the Florida market, where that's where we're at now, and they seem to make more sense from a cash flow perspective at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when we talked, you were, you weren't following the 1% rule because prices 3 years ago were also expensive. So are you trying to find something close to the 1% rule, or is that not even a metric that you're looking at today?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a good benchmark and a good gut check, I think. But really, we look for single family houses, 3 bedroom, 1 or 2 bath, and I look for those that are around 200,000 plus or minus here or there. And so for me, I want properties that'll, if it doesn't cash flow at least $500, that's a deal breaker for me.
Mhm. So that's 500 after the mortgage payment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the metric I look at. I look at every deal, but if they can get in that realm, that's where I need it
Yeah.
to be at least.
And are you able to find deals like in that price range in Florida?
Yes, I am. There's still
Okay.
a few little suburbs, especially like areas of around Crystal River where we're at now, and some of Orlando that yeah, they're pretty close to that.
With your rentals being in Nashville and you being in Florida, how has that been managing the properties? Or are you still managing yourself, or have you hired a property manager?
No, I'm still self-managing every single one of them. And actually, it's been fine. We screen our tenants very, very well prior to putting anybody in there. Have conversations with them, check all their backgrounds, check references, all of that. And knock on wood, I've had pretty good luck with them. And I've got a good base of plumbers, roofers, contractors, things like that I can call, and they know the properties at this point. And we've done a few hot water heaters and HVAC repairs, things like that, but nothing major. So everything seems to be working out well from that front.
So if a tenant were to call you and say they have a leaky faucet, you just call a local plumber, they go over there and fix the issue.
Yeah, actually, what I do is I text the plumber and the tenant at the same time, and give the plumber the address, and ask the tenant when's a good time for them to come by, and kind of let them take it from there.
Let them figure it out. That's smart. Yeah, take yourself out of it. That way you're not going back and forth a million times trying to figure out a good time for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And then the plumber sends me a picture and an invoice, and I just pay it online and never have to really worry about it.
So as the property is rented out, like there's really no reason for you to go to the property. If you have a handyman, different tradespeople that can go over there and fix problems, there's really nothing. It almost doesn't matter where you live.
Yeah, and that's kind of the approach I take. I'm in Nashville every once in a while, and I just kind of make a loop and drive by all of them just to make sure somebody didn't catch it on fire or something,
Sure.
and that the grass is mowed. But I don't see a reason to be constantly out there. It's worked well so far.
Yeah. The one thing that, I have a property manager for my properties, and I agree with you that day to day when maintenance stuff comes up or even collecting rent, it really, you don't need to physically be there. But the part that always trips me up is when there's a turnover, you need to inspect the property, make sure that everything looks good, and then do showings to get the new tenant in there. So how do you do that?
Well, honestly, I haven't had a lot of turnover, but I've had some. And what I do is I'll call him my handyman, but he's much more than that. He'll FaceTime me and walk through the place, and he'll give me his opinion, like, hey, you need to replace this carpet, paint this, the countertop's jacked up, whatever. And he'll give me a number to fix it all.
Okay.
So if there ever is any major repairs, he can knock it out pretty quick. And then what I do is normally I'll put a key box on there or get a key box put on there. And there's nothing in there to steal, really. So
Right.
I've let tenants in there just go check it out. Let me know when they're there. Let me know when they leave. Send me a picture of the key going back in the box or wherever location is. And knock on wood, no problems there either. Of course, I only let prospective tenants walk through there that I would actually rent to, that have passed background checks and things like that. Luckily, the market there is so hot that you can kind of pick and choose tenants. So a lot of people were like, well, I would never pay a application fee just to walk through the house without seeing it. Well, they do there just because it's so hot.
Right. Okay. So they've given you their information. They've applied. This is someone I'm going to consider, and that's when you let them actually see the property.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
okay. Yeah, I think that takes away a lot of the risk. And then, so they see the property, that they say this is great. And then, how do you do the lease signing?
Usually through DocuSign.
Okay, so everything is online after that, and then I guess they pay you online too.
Yeah, some do Zelle, some do Cash App, some do Venmo.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, really, so there's nothing that you need to physically be there for. So I mean, these properties could be on the other side of the country, and it really doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but yeah, you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, I could do that.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, let's take a look at your numbers and see how everything is working out. So when you add up the rents for your entire portfolio, how much total rent do you bring in every month?
$20,925.
Okay. So that's the rent. And then for the short-term rental, is that pretty consistent, or does that vary month to month?
It varies greatly month to month.
Okay. So that's kind of like an average, the 20,000.
Yes.
925. Okay. Now, adding up all of your mortgage payments, how much does that come out to?
$10,773.
Okay. And that includes taxes and insurance?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then for repairs, and you mentioned you don't have much vacancy, but for repairs or CapEx type stuff, how much does that come out to every month?
Dan, I'm not one of those that takes 10% out and puts it in a little in a bucket somewhere. We just kind of address them as they come. And I know, I'm sure there's a lot of your listeners that are screaming at the at the radio right now because of that. But like we haven't had a whole lot of issues. We try when we buy a house, we fix everything. I get a roofer out there. He checks everything, fixes it. I get a plumber out there. Anything that he thinks might need to be, we fix it all.
Yeah.
So we haven't had a lot of problems, and we pay for repairs just as they come up from whatever cash we have.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like you're living on your rental income where you have to stick to a strict budget. I mean, you have a day job. So I guess like the rental income, is this just money that you're using to buy more properties or invest more?
Yeah, the money just goes right back into the savings until we're ready to buy the next one.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, and you have a $10,000 buffer there, and there's probably not many months where you're spending $10,000, right? There's always going to be some money left over.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that makes sense. And, I think it's important to budget money and to figure out how much you're going to spend on repairs. But I feel like that's, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, but I think that's maybe more important when you maybe have one or two properties and you're just starting out. You have less cash flow, and it's more important to kind of budget how you're going to pay for things than when you have $10,000 a month and you can handle just about any issue out of that month's cash flow.
Yeah, I agree. If you have, one or two properties and you're making a little bit of money on each one a month, and then, God forbid, 2 air conditioners go out.
Yeah.
Well, now, that could eat up a whole year's worth of cash flow. So, I think when you have fewer properties, you better have a good and solid plan for maintenance.
Yeah. So, that makes sense, what you're doing. I think that that makes total sense. So, now let me ask you about the neighborhood. So you said the properties are like nicer properties. Would you say that you're buying like A-class properties?
That's maybe B plus.
B plus, okay. And like, what are the jobs like for your tenants? Like, what kind of jobs do they generally have?
One of them is a construction engineer. Another one is a lab tech at a local university. Yeah, they usually have pretty great jobs. Nobody's a laborer or anything like that I know of.
Do you generally on the first few days of the month, is everybody generally paying you rent on time, or do you have any people that are kind of stragglers that are maybe struggling to pay the rent?
It's rare that anybody's late. It has happened a time or two. I did get some advice one time from a older landlord. He told me, he said, don't charge a late fee. Always, if they're late, charge the late fee. So I just tell the tenants, no matter what, you'll owe the late fee if you're late.
Yeah. How much of a late fee do you charge?
10%.
10%. Okay. And, for anyone listening, check your state law, like how much you can charge for a late fee varies state by state, but that's pretty good. I mean, so do you have maybe a couple of late fees a year that you make, or?
I'd say that.
Okay.
Probably just a couple of fees a year. Not usually the first, my phone starts dinging. So
now, as far as finding properties, you mentioned that you're looking in the MLS. Is that something that you're constantly doing, just looking on the MLS, looking to see if new properties have come up?
Well, I check the MLS pretty frequently just so I can keep a pulse on the market. But of course, I'd buy something off the MLS, but I've got a whole network of agents that I let them know, hey, here's what I'm looking for. If something comes up, message me. Mm-hmm. In addition to the MLS, I got a lot of people looking for me.
And when you find a property, are you doing regular 20% down payments, or have you done any kind of creative financing or anything like that?
Typically, we've done 20% down, just traditional mortgages. However, I recently quit my job and have started my own company, and at this point, don't have 2 years worth of income from the company. Wow. So that's thrown a little wrench into how we've been doing this. So we've looked at paying cash for properties or the DR, DSCR loans.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
So we're looking at any option we can get at this point, and I've offered or asked about seller financing on a few different deals and owner financing. Some are, especially with rates these days, a lot of sellers are at least considering it.
Yeah. Yeah. A DSCR loan is probably a good way for you to go at this point, because they're not going to want to see your pay stubs or your bank statements. I mean, it's purely looking at the deal. So that for anyone else that is maybe in a similar situation, I mean, that's a great way to buy a property. Now, the other great thing with rental properties is appreciation, that over time, the properties are going to go up in value and the rents are going to go up in value. Have your rents gone up a lot over the last few years?
They have. I wouldn't say they've gone up a lot, but they've gone up noticeably.
Now, there was one property that we talked about when you were on last time that you had bought for $185 and it was rented for $1,450. Mm-hmm. How much is the rent today, 3 years later, on that property?
Yeah, I believe that one's $1,850 now.
$1,850. So an extra $400, and your expenses, have they gone up, or is that just
a little bit?
Okay.
Property taxes have gone up just a little bit in that area, but I don't think no more than like $25 or $50 a month.
Okay. So you're making an extra $375 a month on that property.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's I think the greatest thing with rental properties is that as more time goes by, properties just become more profitable. So
sure.
that's pretty awesome. And then the other thing is appreciation. So I mean, you've been buying rentals for how long now? Like 4 years or so?
4 years. Yeah. We started in 2019.
And so you got in at a great time, right before prices went crazy. When you look over your portfolio, how much do you estimate that your properties have gone up in value since you bought them?
Now, don't shun me for this, Dan, but I use Zillow as my, their estimate as my kind of benchmark just to stay consistent. I'm sure there's 20 other websites I could look at, but that's what I try to follow that and check on these properties once a month just to put it in my spreadsheet. And right now, it looks like the total appreciation has been about 1.3 million for all of the properties.
Wow, and that's in 4 years with 8 properties.
Mm-hmm.
That's remarkable. I mean, so you $1.3 million in appreciation plus the cash flow, and also, something we don't think about, but it's real money you're making is the mortgage pay down every month.
Yep,
when
correct.
You're paying those mortgages off. So that is awesome. Matthew, I mean, I'm really, really happy for you. I'm glad we followed up here. This is really incredible what you've done here over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been good catching up with you.
If you want to reach out to Matthew, I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 441. And if you want to go back and listen to Matthew's first interview, he was on episode number 280. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She has a ton of different loan options. She's got the DSCR loans. She's got first position HELOCs. She has low down payment options, interest-only loans. You name it, Chaley can get it done for you. If you want to find out more or set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, you can track her down at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE, lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. I'll be back with a new interview next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.